Welcome to the podcast. We Do Recover with Jared Miller, your host.
And I'm Dr. Terry Sellers, your co-host.
This is a podcast about addiction, but more importantly, about recovery.
We want to talk about what successful recovery can look like.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn.
You are listening to episode 13 of We Do Recover. I'm your host, Jared Miller. Today, I am not joined by your co-host and our medical expert, Dr. Terry Sellers. He had some emergency surgery, apparently, and he will not be able to join us for episode 13, but we wish him well. I am joined, however, in studio by the man that makes this thing possible. You wouldn't even be able to hear our voices transmitted through the airwaves if it wasn't for the man, Sean Denovan.
Hey! That's all I got.
All right. And your featured guest is the founder of the Bernal Badassery Foundation. She's an author of the book, The Things We Don't Talk About. And she recently gave a TEDx talk up in Ogden, Utah. Stacy Bernal.
Yes. Hello.
Welcome. This podcast is recorded in sunny St. George, Utah. Episode 13, Part 1 is brought to you by Steps Recovery Centers, where addiction ends and healing begins. Listen, if your loved one needs help, please give them a call at 801-800-8142. Let's do some check-ins. Sean, what's going on, buddy? We already know Terry's bad, right? He's
awake now that you called him.
Hopefully he gets feeling better. I can't even imagine. What's doing good with you, Sean?
I've just been doing some motorcycle work. Working on my motorcycle. I got some Army ammo cans, and I made them my saddlebags.
Nice.
So that was my big project.
Way to be inventive.
Nothing special, just, a little tinkering on the weekend.
Sweet. So I'll go with the new and good.
Yeah. Tell us.
So, my new and good this week is I was able to get Stacy Bernal down here, and me and her went yesterday to Steps Recovery Centers, and she gave an amazing talk at Steps. It was fantastic. She is the real deal. She had them laughing 1 minute, crying the next. I mean, it was a beautiful thing. Stacy, what's new and good with you?
New and good is that I'm here in sunny St. George. Got out of it's been getting pretty chilly in Ogden.
Has it?
Yeah.
Starting to cool off?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that time of year where it snows right around the corner.
I know. I joke that in the shade it's winter and in the sun it's spring. It's that time of year. Like you could just go around the corner and be like, oh, am I wearing a sweater or am I wearing shorts? I don't know.
Right. The weather changes throughout the day too. I always remember when I lived up north, it was cold in the mornings, hot in the afternoons, and then cold again in the evenings.
Yeah.
Yep. Good old days.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate you being willing to come down here. A lot of people like you that are Utah famous, when we first talked to them about coming on the podcast, they're like, yeah. When push comes to shove, they don't always make it. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
And thank you for calling me Utah famous.
Well, yeah. I mean, anybody that gives a TED talk, up and coming. So you've been through kind of a journey.
A little bit.
Yeah. And like the Miller Motivation Group, my tagline is tragedy to triumph.
Yes.
See Stacy Speak has a tagline, which is
failure to finisher.
Yeah. And we're going to get into that. First of all, let's just find out who's Stacy. Like, talk to us about your family, husband, kids. What's going on?
So I am happily married. I've been married to Dusty for 7 years.
Shout out to Dusty.
Woot woot. And we have a 24-year-old daughter. She's married, and she just had our second grandbaby. So I got two littles.
Nice.
And then I have a 15-year-old son. He's my autistic son, Hayden. And then we have an 8-year-old, Eli. And so we're very spread out with the family. We're busy.
Yeah, you're a busy lady.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, cool. So now that we kind of got to know you a little bit more, talk to us about, I love what we talked about kind of before the podcast, right? This podcast is about addiction and about recovery, but I've always said addiction is the end product of a mental health struggle. Mm-hmm. I truly believe that, right? There's a dual diagnosis there. So I love having you on because you can bring the experience and talk to people about some of those struggles through some of the things that you've went through. Every story has a start. Where does it start for Stacy Bernal?
Yeah. Well, man, my journey, I think as a kid, I had what I thought was a pretty normal childhood for most of my life. And then as I became a teenager, I started experience abuse. My dad sexually abused me for several years. And that was obviously a big and I didn't recognize it at the time as trauma, but it was a traumatic event in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah. And then my parents went through a divorce, which was kind of another layer of trauma. And then as a junior in high school, I got pregnant, and that was, kind of another, I placed that baby for adoption. So my journey was rocky.
Yeah. So at what age did your parents go through a divorce? And were you born and raised here in Utah? Where was home for you originally?
I was a Navy brat. So
Okay.
yeah, I was born in New Jersey, and we moved all over. So we lived in Long Beach, California. We lived in Cuba, and it was like every year my dad would get stationed somewhere else, and so it'd be like, we were moving all over. So Virginia and then South Carolina was actually where we landed for the longest. So
South Carolina.
grew up in the South, and that's where I went to middle school and high school and graduated.
Okay.
Yeah.
At what age were you when your parents went through a divorce?
Well, the kind of stuff hit the fan.
Okay.
I'm going to say stuff in place of what I would usually say. When I was in sixth grade, and then my parents actually stayed together for a while and tried to work things out, which ultimately they couldn't do. So I was in the end of seventh grade, coming into eighth grade, when my parents finally split, and we sold our house that my family had built together, and my mom moved us into a single wide trailer.
Oh, man, that had to be hard.
Yeah, it was very hard.
When you look back as a kid, was that really hard for you at the time, or did it just kind of seem like, well, this is normal? I mean, do you remember any emotions that were going through you at that time?
It was pretty hard. My mom was putting herself through nursing school, and so it was my older sister and then me, and then we had two younger brothers, and so a lot of the caretaking fell on me and my sister, and which was fine. I mean, it was just kind of like we had to do it.
Yeah.
So it was, I think we matured in a lot of ways very quickly. But yeah, moving from, we had been in our neighborhood forever and had all our friends there. And then we moved into this single wide trailer, and there were 6 of us. It was my mom and 5 kids. And we were like sardines, right? We were in this can, and it actually had put me in a different school boundary. And so I was like, yeah. And I went to this new school at the start of 8th grade, and I was there for the first week, and I came home to my mom and I was like, don't make me do this. Like, my life already sucks. And she was able to get me a boundary exception so I could go back to at least I could still be in school with my friends.
Yeah. Yeah. That's important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So going through school, you go through this traumatic event. You kind of put it out there as you got into high school and stuff. Tell us about that period in time in your life. What did high school look like for you? What were you involved in?
I was a band nerd.
Get out of here. Really? I don't know yeah. Okay.
I know I think people would have guessed that I was like a cheerleader, or I don't know, some other.
I think band's cool. Hey,
like,
I was
cool.
in choir.
Yeah.
I was the tin man in a play in junior high, believe it or not. So that's cool.
If I could sing, I would have been in the choir, but I had to play an instrument because that was, yeah. But yeah, I was a clarinetist. In fact, in 8th grade, I was the first chair clarinetist for the state of South Carolina. So it was kind of a big deal.
Yeah. You've been a trendsetter since you were little.
I know, right?
Sean, have you had any experience, with bands or in choirs or plays or any, like?
We did a garage thing for about 2 hours and realized that we sucked. That was about as far as a band thing that we did. I mean, we spent more time trying to come up with a name than actually practicing. And I think that's with every band when you're 14.
That's awesome.
But I had my 12-string. I'm like, yeah, I have a 12-string. You know how to play it? No, but I have a 12-string.
There you go. See, I wouldn't say band nerd, right? It's cool. It's cool in its own sense, especially if you're doing the garage thing, right? I can see you as a heavy metal guy, Sean. Okay, so let's get back on track. Sorry, I just went left field real quick. So you're doing the band thing. Got some friends, right? Some good people around you.
Yeah.
At what point did you find out that you had a child?
So it was my junior year, and I was actually the drum major of the marching band at that point. So, and I grew up Mormon. I grew up LDS in South Carolina, which is you know, if you're familiar with being Mormon in Utah, it feels very normal to
Right.
be of the dominant religion. And in the South, it was the exact opposite. So we were, people already kind of thought we were weirdos
Okay.
and
Yeah.
had,
Yeah.
you know, they had lots of preconceived ideas about Mormonism. And so I already had kind of that going on. And then I was the drum major, and my sister, who's a year older than me, was the valedictorian. So she was the shining star of our high school. And all of a sudden, here I am. I got pregnant, and it was pretty scandalous. It was juicy gossip.
Yeah. It was a high school drama, right?
Yeah.
I can see it.
Yeah.
So yeah, talk me through that. What did that look like for you as far as how did that affect you? What was your first thoughts like?
I was very scared. I was very scared to tell my mom.
Oh, I could imagine.
Yeah. And I was embarrassed and I was ashamed, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things, like we can make mistakes in our life and they're not all going to become super obvious. Like we're going to wear it like a scarlet letter, right?
Yeah. Great point.
And my idea was that I'm just going to hide this and not talk about it, and hopefully no one notices.
Wishful thinking, right?
I know. And I almost made it. No, it obviously got out. I mean, people noticed. And one day I walked into the bathroom and someone had written that I was a knocked up hoe on the bathroom stall door. And I saw that, and it hurt. Like that kind of, it's a gut punch.
Yeah, I could imagine. It's one thing to not quite know if people know, right? But when you see it in writing on a bathroom stall, it's like, oh boy.
Oh, I guess they know.
Yeah. Yeah. So that period of time, I'm sure, was super difficult for you.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, what became of that?
So I had actually decided that I was going to place this baby for adoption because, you know, remember, I'm living with my mom who's, you know, she's a single mom at this point, and we're in a trailer and we're poor. I mean, we were broke while she was putting herself through nursing school. So I had actually found the couple. My mom actually worked with the woman who,
Oh, wow.
yeah. So I became friends with them. They would call me every month, you know, during my pregnancy, and they'd be like, "What are you craving this month?" And they would take me out to eat. And
Oh, God bless them.
yeah, and I loved them. I was so happy that these were the people that were going to be raising my baby, you know.
Yep.
So because of that experience of seeing my name written on the bathroom stall door, I decided I did not want to come back to high school, but I also did not want to be a dropout. So I found out that I could graduate early. I could take summer school classes. I only needed 2 credits. And the only issue was that I could only miss 2 days of classes and still be able to graduate. And my due date was actually at the beginning of July. And so I was like, I don't know how I'm going to swing this, you know, like take summer school and have this baby that I'm placing for adoption and graduate. But I jumped in and I was like, well, I'm going to see what happens. So I ended up going into labor on a Wednesday night, and I delivered on Thursday. And I was so far along by the time I got to the hospital, like I couldn't even get an epidural. So, I mean, I was like,
That baby was coming.
I was hardcore. Like, yeah, this baby was coming. And the adoptive couple was already there. Like, they got to the hospital before I was even there, and they were with me the whole time. And they were, you know, obviously so excited. And then the lawyers came the next day, and I was holding my son in my arms while I was signing away my rights.
That's got to be one of the hardest things you've ever been through, yeah?
Yeah.
I could imagine.
That broke my heart. And and then went home that weekend. I was pretty much in bed crying with my mom the whole weekend. And then I went back to school on Monday. And that was how I graduated.
So it was graduation the very next. So it was.
I had him on June 23rd. So I was back to school, whatever that Monday was. And then graduation was like at the beginning of August. So it was about, yeah.
Did you get a lot of people asking you about it? I mean, how
yeah. And you know,
sure.
And the funny thing is, so in that program, because I was with a bunch of other students who they were graduating early for other reasons.
Okay.
And a couple, like one of the girls is like, I want to get married. And I mean, we were young, we were teenagers. I was 17. And, so we were all in kind of unique situations. Some of them had already had kids, and it was kind of interesting because when I told people with other students that I had placed my baby for adoption, I got a lot of like, why did you do that? Because back in the day, that was kind of, if you were a teen mother, if you got pregnant as a teen, like you would just keep it, and that would, be your life, is that you were a teen mom. And so it was kind of weird to me that so many people, and I felt that guilt. I mean, it was already so painful, and I felt that hole in my heart when when we drove away from the hospital. He was in his little car seat with his mom and dad, and I just, like, that moment of driving away and knowing I'm never going to see him again, it was, heartbreaking. And then people were like, well, why'd you do that? And it was like, I don't know, like maybe I made a mistake, but it was because I was doing what was best. I was doing what was best for him, and I was doing what was best for me at the time. So,
which takes an insurmountable, it takes a huge amount of courage to be able to do that, right? To be able to look out for your son more than yourself and give him a better chance at life.
Yeah.
And we'll kind of get into that in part 2. And I know I'm excited for that because you got some amazing things to share. Before that, though, how did that affect you moving forward?
So that combined with my abuse that I had never really fully addressed, it kind of wrecked me. And I didn't realize it, again, like these things that you just don't realize when you're young.
Yeah.
And I was so hard on myself back then because I felt like a bad person. I felt like I had made a mistake. I had sinned. I was a bad person. And that idea of being a knocked up hoe. So it created this, all this shame around that. So it was not something I did not want people to know. I wanted to, shelve that part of my life. I didn't want to talk about it. And, when you carry these ideas about yourself being less than, it makes it really hard to connect. It makes it hard for you to feel like you're worthy of love. And so I carried all of that weight very, very heavily. And, I started drinking because I was hurting so bad. And that was, I remember I drank a 6-pack of Zima back in the day, if you remember Zima.
Okay, yeah.
Nasty beverage.
Sean's laughing. Obviously, Sean remembers Zima.
I think Zima is the White Claw of the 90s.
Oh,
was it?
Yeah.
It was horrible. It was, but that was because I didn't drink beer back then. Because beer. No.
But
Beer
Zima,
too
yeah.
low
But
class.
Zima, I could handle. And I drank a 6-pack of Zima, and I pretty much, I remember that I was giddy and I was laughing, and then I blacked out.
Okay.
And that was kind of, but that experience, after the next day, after I was done being hungover and I sobered up, I remembered thinking, at least it muted the pain. It muted the pain for a short period of time.
Yeah. And I'm so appreciative that you shared that, because trauma always equals, right, substance abuse. Back to what I talked about originally. People don't wake up and go, hey, I think I'll just drink a 6-pack of, nasty tasting Zima and, for no reason most of the time. Maybe if you're kids and you're just trying to experiment, right? But most of us, there's some type of trauma that leads to that.
Yeah.
So at that point you started drinking, right? So self-medicating.
Mm-hmm.
Did it grab a hold of you like it does for those of us that identify as an addict, or was it something that you were able to handle on your own?
At that point, I feel like that was the start of a downward spiral.
Okay.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
So I got my first job at a movie theater, and everyone at the theater partied. And so it made it very easy because, again, I was 17. I was underage.
Yeah.
And I had older friends. And so it became a regular thing for me to escape my pain, to, go with my friends. And so, in your head, you're like, oh, this is fun. I'm doing, all my friends are doing it and it looks so fun and we're going to do these things. But for me, it was like, and I can forget that, these years of pain and these horrible things that have happened and these bad feelings about myself, I can kind of wash them down. I can wash them down and wash them away. And and then I wake up the next morning feeling horrible and I'm, vomiting and I'm saying, oh, I'm never going to do that again.
Until the next weekend rolls
Until
around.
you do it again.
Yeah. It's a vicious cycle. It can become a
is.
vicious cycle.
Yeah.
I also like that you shared. So Blue Robinson, Coach Blue came on and he talked about anything that follows an I am statement is absolute truth. And when you shared the kindest remark of Stacy as a blah, 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 right? It kind of sounds to me like that you pulled that in as an identity, which I'm sure was super hard in and of itself. And so I think a lot of times when we're younger, we don't know better to just blow that stuff off and not let it become a part of who we are, because during that age group, a lot of what other people think about you base your self-worth or your I ams based on that. Does that connect for you? Do you feel like there's some truth in that maybe?
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally, I identified as being tarnished. And I think too with the religious piece too, there was kind of this idea that we have these goals to be chaste and to be virtuous and to get married and do all these things, and there's this idea of purity around all of that. And I felt like I didn't have that, and so I would never be able to be that thing that you're told all your life. This is who you are and this is how you're supposed to be. And so now I was the exact opposite of that. And I was dirty and I would never be good enough to, have that life. And
yeah. And that's good. All those things are great standards, right, to have. Unfortunately, I think what I'm perceiving is you felt like you didn't fit in with either crowd, right? Because your whole life you grew up LDS, out in North Carolina where the culture is not that, like we have here in Utah. And so you can't really connect with people outside of the church because they know you as LDS. And so you're already a little weird, right?
Yeah.
And yet people inside the church now, I'm assuming, know of kind of some trauma, things you've been through. That was obvious. As you stated, some of us can hide our dirt easily than others. So I'm sure that was really hard for you as far as being able to find where you fit.
Yeah.
So as you got older, I understand you went to school. Seems like this kind of attached on and you struggled with it for a while. Yeah.
Always the feeling of I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And it manifested in all of these ways over the years. And so that's why, when I speak to that failure to finish her story, I would start college, right? And then I would drop out. And I did that 3 times, by the time I was 31, I was a 3-time college dropout. And I got married and then I got divorced and then I got married and divorced and did that 3 times. And I'm like, I'm a mess. Because I would second guess my decisions. I would feel like, I'm not good enough. I can start something, but then I would never finish.
Yeah. Yeah. That feeling like you're not good enough, right? Like you don't quite belong. Kind of that imposter syndrome, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. We're going to get into Stacy's story of how she was able to come back from her rock bottom that she just shared with you in part 2. For those of you that are listening, thank you so much. Also, you can check this out. We are now on iHeartRadio. We're on all major podcast platforms. Thank you so much. I just want to take the last minute here in part 1 to express some gratitude. A couple weeks ago, I got a notification, Sean, on our email that we had officially hit 2,000 downloads. So people are listening. We must be bringing some content, some different stuff that people can relate to. So I just want to express my gratitude to some people that make that possible. Obviously, Tyler Hansen with Steps Recovery Center, all the amazing people there. I also want to thank Dr. Sellers, who's not here with us today, for coming on. I want to thank you, Sean, for being able to make this thing happen for us. And then every one of our guests, really, to take their time. They don't get paid to come on here. Take their time to come on and share their message of hope. It's not easy to pull your guts out, right, and expose all the hard things that you've been through to be able to make it to this point. So thank you so much. For those of you that are listening, we're going to wrap up part 1 of episode 13. Stacy, where can they find this book?
My book is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and anyone who wants to reach out to me directly, I'll sign and send a copy.
Check her out. She's on social media at See Stacy Speaks. Stay tuned to part 2, where she's going to talk about her bounce back from her rock bottom.
You are listening to We Do Recover with Jared Miller and co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. We'll be right back after this short break with more of We Do Recover with Jared Miller, sponsored by Steps Recovery Center and the Hilton Garden Inn.
I'm Desmond Lomax, one of the clinical executives here at Steps Recovery, and once you become with the Steps family, you're just a part of the Steps family. A lot of us have overcome substances, overcome addiction, and now we're able to help other people. Second of all, we're also going to help you in a way where you can afford to be helped. Third of all, we're going to give you the same quality that many organizations are charging 2 to 3 times, and it's more about you than it is about our organization.
We welcome you back to We Do Recover with Jared Miller, co-hosted by Dr. Terry Sellers. Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn. And now with part 2 of our podcast, Jared Miller and Dr. Terry Sellers.
You're listening to episode 13 of We Do Recover. We are featuring Stacy Bernal. This is part 2. Episode 13, part 2 is brought to you by the Hilton Garden Inn St. George. It is always sunny and bright at the Hilton Garden Inn St. George. If you're traveling through southern Utah, give them a Google search. Just type in Hilton Garden Inn St. George, Utah. I promise you won't be disappointed to have amazing amenities. In fact, our featured guest stayed last night at the Hilton Garden Inn, right?
I did, and I was just going to say they were awesome. They, in fact, I got in early, and I was like, oh, they're probably not going to let me check in, and it was like they were like rolling out the red carpet for me. So I appreciate that. That was awesome.
That's
Love the Hilton Garden Inn.
I love hearing that. Their
Yeah.
pool, did you get a chance to jump in their little pool?
I was going to, and there were a bunch of kids, and I know this is so mean, but I was like, I'm so happy to have a little break from kids right now.
I bet.
I was like, but I went for my bike ride instead, so it was all good.
There you go. You lived in some serenity while you could have it.
Yeah.
Huh? That's awesome. So in part 1, Stacy Bernal, who is the founder of the Bernal Badassery. She is the author of this book, The Things We Don't Talk About. And she recently gave a TEDx talk up in Ogden, Utah. I'm looking at this book, and there's it's got a picture of you, and it's got some labels on there.
Yes.
You talked about in part 1, the knocked up hoe.
Yep.
Daddy issues.
Yep.
Trailer trash. There's some different stuff on here. That's pretty brave, Stacy.
Yeah. And those are all literally things that people have either said about me or to me.
Wow.
And, when I was thinking about what I wanted for the cover of my book, this idea was just, how we can, because I'm also wearing this purple party dress.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of how we kind of mask these painful, hurtful things. We can, the world can see this. We look fine on the outside when we really have these hurts, this pain that we carry.
Yeah. Yeah. The unaddressed traumas, maybe. Stacy's amazing. I love bringing people on that don't hesitate to share their dirt. And Stacy talks about it in a little bit different ways. We're going to get into it. She's got some 3Cs she's going to talk to you about. But she came on, and in part 1, she bravely shared the things that she's been through. And I know, right, just like yesterday when we went to Steps and we shared, and I'm not going to give anybody's anonymity away, but there were some people in the audience that I know for a fact connected with that. And it's a beautiful thing. And you talk about that. So you talked about your rock bottom. Was there an actual rock bottom? Like, do you remember a time, just to wrap up part 1 and transition into bouncing back?
Yeah, I had years of some not good times, but there was very specifically one night, and it was in November of 2009. That was the night that I wanted to check out. I thought, I'm done. I am so tired of hurting. I'm so tired of feeling like a failure, and I felt like a horrible mom. I had just gone through a horrible breakup, a horrible relationship and breakup, and I drank a bottle of wine. I made a really hot bath. I found some pills in my medicine cabinet that I took. I have no idea what they were. I took some pills, and then I drank another bottle of wine. And I thought, if I could just slip under this bath water, if I could just slip under in oblivion, that would be great. Yeah. And obviously I didn't, but I got out, and I was lying on my bathroom floor, and that was my rock bottom, because I had an autistic son and I had lost custody of my daughter. And I was just thinking, am I going to leave my kids, or am I going to pull myself out of this dark place?
I love it. You found your why.
Yeah.
In that dark moment,
Yeah.
you found your why. So let's talk about that. That's, I think, what inspired the Bernal Badassery Foundation. You shared in part one, part of your family, you have a son. Talk to us about that.
So Hayden is autistic, and he was diagnosed. It was right around, like, that was part of that rock bottom is I was a single mom raising this special needs child and feeling like I'm not enough. I can't, I'm failing him. And I was like, I have to do better. Like this can't be, the idea of not being able to put a roof over his head. It was one thing, at that point it was bigger than me, because it's like, if I'm moving out of my car, but if I can't be dragging my special needs child into this. So, I decided to go back to school. It was my fourth attempt at college.
Fourth time.
For anyone keeping track, it was my fourth attempt. And I finally graduated, and so I got to back up a little. I ran my first marathon in 2009, and that was the game changer. So when I talk about failure to finisher, it was crossing the finish line of a marathon changed my life, because then I started thinking, I can do hard things. If I could do that, I could do other hard things, which that, ultimately led to me going back to college, and then just kind of from there, what else can I do now? Yeah.
So you have this fallout, right? This rock bottom. You're in the process of picking yourself up from your bootstraps. Why a marathon? Like, I just want to know, like, did somebody say, hey, you should run a marathon? Like, how did the marathon come about?
So
Stacy?
I was actually waiting tables at there's a restaurant up in Layton called Roosters.
Oh yeah. I've eaten there many times.
I love Roosters. So the owners are amazing people, and they had relay teams for the Ogden Marathon. And so this was actually in 2008. They had me run the first 7 miles of the Ogden Marathon. And I was not a runner at that point. Like, I went to the gym and I exercised, but I was not a runner. And so I did the first 7 miles, and then we get on a bus, and it takes us back down through the canyon and to the finish line. And when I was standing at the finish line watching the marathoners come in, I was like, I want to do that. And you got to remember, like, people are crossing the finish line and they're like nipples are bleeding and people are vomiting, and it's not a pretty picture. But the triumph, that sense of accomplishment, like, you can feel that, you can see that. And I just was like, I want to do that. So I started running. And so I did like a 10-mile run, and then a half marathon. And then I came back in 2009, and I conquered my first marathon. And I was like, okay, one and done. Like, I'll just do one. Yeah. And that didn't happen. But it was,
you got addicted.
I did.
Got its hooks in you.
I did. Yeah.
I love it.
I did. But the funny thing is, so there was a book, and I referenced it yesterday in my presentation. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score.
I love it.
Yeah. And it's Bessel van der Kolk is the author, and he talks about how our body deals with trauma, and how our brain is rewired due to trauma. And when I read that book, it was like a manual to, like, someone had said, here you go, Stacy, here's like all about you. And I was like, oh my gosh. But one of the things that he talks about is a lot of marathoners have gone through trauma, and they need this. There's this piece about kind of the pain of doing that, and the adrenaline of doing that kind of, replaces these like chemicals in your brain that happen. So anyway, I'm like, that makes sense.
You know what I love about that, actually? So I'm going to school at UVU to get my SUDC, right? Substance Use Disorder Counselor. So what you're talking about is EMDR, right? It's a research deal where some people do it differently. Some are through eye movement, some get out and exercise, right? But it's basically going through the emotional process through some type of physical interaction. And it's crazy, because as you're talking to me about this, like, it's just popping off in my head, like, that's EMDR, and she discovered it without even knowing it.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Yeah. So you finish so you finished your first marathon. How was that a game changer to you? Because now you've actually started something and boom, finished it.
Yeah.
That's when failure to finisher really took hold.
That's when she was born. I really didn't have any idea that I was one person at the start of that, and I was a different person when I finished it. And so even, after that, when I told my mom I was going back to college for the 4th time, she was like, I don't think you should do that. And I'm like, what? And
School's a lot of money.
she's like, school's not your forte. And da-da-da. And I'm like, well, and I honestly said to her, well, this time's different because I'm a marathoner. Like it was this, like, it was totally cheesy, but it was true. It was
the new
true.
I am.
Yeah. Like now I have this new sense of self was I really think the biggest thing that I can do hard things. I can, all those years I felt like I'm not good enough. I'm not good. Yes, you are. Yeah. You can do anything that you think you can do.
Yeah.
So
That's awesome. Okay. So that was the birth.
that was the birth.
That let's transition into how do you go from, sure, you ran your first marathon. It was a game changer for you. You got this new sense of self, this new I am statement, something positive you can hold on to.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you start to dive into, you finished school, I want to give you that credit.
Mm-hmm.
At what point did you start to dive into, I know, what was it, at 8 years old, you became a award-winning speaker?
In 8th grade, I was an award-winning speaker.
So at what point do you transition that into the Stacy Bernal that we know today, the author, the foundation? And talk to us a little bit. Let's start there with your foundation, right?
Yeah. So there's like, this is all these things that have just really happened in the last 3 years was when I really kind of blew up with all these different ideas. And it all kind of happened with the speaking because I did my first presentation in 2017 and from there got the idea then I'm going to write a book and just this idea that I can share parts of my story. I can share parts of my past and it's helping other people.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got a frog in my throat.
You're good.
But so with the nonprofit, the way we decided to create that is we do have an autistic son. And in 2018, I was seeing on Facebook that there were a bunch of autism awareness walks happening throughout Utah in Salt Lake and Provo and Logan, but there wasn't anything in Ogden. And someone said to me, well, why don't you do an autism walk in Ogden? And I was like, okay, why not? Why not me? Do I need to ask permission from anyone? Why not? So I very haphazardly threw together this event and we had 20 people that showed up and we just walked around 25th Street, but it ended up getting us a little bit of media attention. And I decided for 2019, I would really actually put some time and effort into it. And we created a much bigger event for 2019 and we held it up at Weber State and we did a screening of a documentary about autism and we had 14 vendors and we had about 300 people that came to our event that year. And
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And what happened was people were coming in. It was a free community event. We had gotten sponsors and the vendors were all coming for free. And so, people were coming to the door and they were like, well, where can we donate? And I'm like, what do you mean donate? We don't, they're like, well, we want to, we want to, do you have a cause or something? And I'm like, no, but that's not a bad idea.
There you go.
And so and prior to that, another thing is when I do my speaking, I connect with a lot of people. Obviously, people who kind of resonate with my story. And in the fall of 2018, I had met a student who was going through a really hard time. And I ended up becoming pretty close with her, having some really deep conversations with her. And one of the things that she was dealing with was that she didn't have a car. She was 23 and she had guardianship of her 7-year-old niece. And, she's trying to finish school and she didn't have a car. Yeah. And together with a group of friends, we raised a bunch of money and we got this girl a car. And I mean, this car, it was a Saturn that was as old as she was. And
I bet she loved it.
She loved it. Yeah. But kind of the same thing. So we were now doing these things and raising money, but money was coming into my bank account. And that made me very uncomfortable because I want there to be transparency. I don't want people to ever say, what is Stacy raising money for? It's not for me. I promise I'm not Christmas shopping or whatever. Right. And so after that, and then after the autism event, we were like, let's get official and let's create this nonprofit. And the Bernal Badassery Foundation, first of all, I was worried that the IRS would say no, would not approve that name, but they did approve that name. And so our mission is that we want to help people who are off and on the autism spectrum who are trying to improve their lives and they need a helping hand along the way because man, do I get it, right? Like, especially as I was a single mom and I was getting through college, I definitely had a ton of help. I did not get to where I am by myself. And so, man, like if we can just in small ways help people in their journeys, we want to be able to do that. So,
and even if sure, it's great to be able to help somebody raise money to get somebody into a vehicle. So obviously listeners by now have probably realized that me and Stacy are friends, right? I know Stacy pretty well here. So you also, I love the story about your son, how a lot of people would say like, you're weird, right? And you took that negative and was able to turn it into a positive.
Yeah.
So even if, and I'll let you share, but even if it's that, right? Even if it's raising enough money to be able to spend time or give these people avenues where they can take maybe some social situations and turn them into a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there is certainly a stigma around disability and mental illness and autism. If you are familiar with autism, you can recognize it fairly easily. You can kind of tell. And I know I certainly can. It's even just seeing a random person walking down the street, but like they often have a lot of commonalities.
Yeah.
And so you'll see like if they have like noise canceling headphones on, we might see that and be like, oh, what's that person doing? They look weird. And in my mind, I'm like, that person is probably on the spectrum and probably has some sensory disorders. And, it's, and so the more that people can see that and, be kind about that, because man, I worry about my kid every day. And we worry about our children anyway, but with him, being on the spectrum and, being a big kid, and if he has a meltdown, it looks scary. It looks,
right.
It looks like he could be dangerous. And I know he's not, but your average person might not, they could perceive him as a threat. And so, it is one of my life's missions is to make the world a safer, better place for him and other people like him.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing that ties close into me for multiple reasons. A couple of them I'll share. My dad was a special ed teacher, and man, there's some people that have patience and can see the beauty in that and make it a beautiful thing. Also, my girlfriend Mandy is a special ed teacher down here in Washington County. So yeah, it's amazing. I love the foundation. So at what point did you decide, talk to us a little bit about the book? You go and you start giving speeches and somebody randomly says, you should write a book.
Yeah. Yeah. In 2017 at that first event, this guy was like, you should write a book. And I said, why would I do that? Like no one would ever read my book. Like who cares? And he said, you never know whose life you could help by sharing your story.
Yeah.
And it's just planted this seed. And so I was like, okay, like why not? And I had a blog that had like 5 followers. So like no one was reading my stuff, but I just started writing more and started, instead of publishing on my blog, I started sending it out to different publications. And I ended up, Autism Parenting Magazine and HuffPost. And I ended up getting published in quite a few places. And so I was like, okay, well, that's telling me that at least I'm not a horrible writer. So, so I just started writing, and then it was actually last year I finally was like, okay, like, am I doing this or not? Because I've been saying for 2 years.
Gotta commit.
I know, I'm writing a book. And finally I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do it. And I self-published on Amazon, which is actually relatively easy. Watch a lot of YouTube videos and figure out how to do stuff. But yeah, I put it out. I put it out into the world, and it was terrifying. It was terrifying because like in my first month I sold over 200 copies, and I was like, amazing. I'm like, that is 200 people who know like my dirt, like, everything, like
who were inspired.
I'm
by
like,
your
I
dirt,
feel like I'm
Stacy.
walking around naked, but what was amazing was that my feedback was really, really good. And people who, I worried about, even talking about my abuse and the fact that I grew up LDS and kind of the way the situation happened with that, I was really worried about how my LDS friends would take that.
Sure.
And they embraced me, and they understand, and they totally get it. And so where I was so worried, like, oh my gosh, I might lose friends over this, it was the exact opposite. And because my story is not that unique, unfortunately. And a lot of people can resonate with that and say, you know what, I had the same or similar experience, or they knew someone who did. So, you know, that's how, again, it's this idea of we're so disconnected. We think we're disconnected because these things happen. But then when we talk about it, the things we don't want to talk about, people resonate with that. They are drawn to that because they're like, yeah, like I get it. And you're one of the people, you know, willing to have the conversation about it. So
Absolutely. And look, there's one thing about just being sappy, right? And kind of the pity. And sometimes when I get haters, they'll give me a hard time about, you know, another sad story by Jared, but they don't get it, right? Because it's no longer sad anymore. When I share my story of addiction and being homeless and a suicide attempt, it's not to get people to feel sorry for me. It's to go, look, if I was able to go through those things, just being an average guy, there's people that are going through them as we speak that need to hear, that need to hear the message. Too many times when I was going through the stuff I was going through, it was disheartening because I thought, if I'm going to be a janitor forever, if I'm going to have to ride the bus forever, like, and there wasn't a ton of people that had long-term sobriety because they'd kind of moved on in their life and they'd put that behind them and they'd sweep it under the rug or put it on the shelf, as you put it. Those messages need to be told.
yeah,
They need to stand up and say, you can do it. You can go through it. That's what this podcast is all about. That's amazing. And you've turned it into beautiful things. So we're winding down on time here, but I want you to talk to us about the 3 C's.
Yes.
What is cultivating a pearl, Stacy?
Okay. So the 3 C's in order are clarity, cultivating pearls, and communication. And these are just ways that, you know, I talk about harnessing your inner badass.
Got it.
Clarity is knowing your why. And, you know, we've kind of touched on that a little bit today is, you know, my kids and my rock bottom, my why was my kids.
Yeah.
Which I think many people can connect to that. And then cultivating pearls is really my take on how you can take your bad experiences and turn them into something beautiful and, you know, using our pain for purpose. And so for me, you know, that I held this idea about myself being a knocked up hoe, being a bad person.
Right.
That was how I identified for so many years. And when he was 23, so when my birth son was 23, was the first time I publicly shared his story. And I said, you know, the pearl that I have created that took 23 years to create is that I'm a birth mother. And a birth mother is beautiful. That's how I identify, not as that, you know, bad person who did a bad thing. And that's what, you know, I tell other people, look, think back to your past. Think back to maybe things, even things that you've done that you've hurt other people, you know, and obviously things that have happened to you as well. But how could you take those negative experiences and shift the perspective and be able to see them as something beautiful as the end result?
Yeah, that's huge. And that's a game changer. For those people that don't know why we call it cultivating a pearl, how does a pearl come about?
Yeah. So, an irritant gets into a mollusk. It's usually like a grain of sand, gets into a mollusk, and the mollusk is trying to protect itself from the irritant. And so this scientific reaction is triggered and it starts coating layer upon layer of mother of pearl around this grain of sand.
So we could call the grain of sand mistakes.
Yes.
Okay.
And then when it's cracked open, that pearl, that's, you know, the years and years of you've been trying to protect yourself. You've been trying to, you know, disconnect from this hurtful thing. And then in reality, it's something beautiful and precious.
I love that. I love that. And we're winding down. We got 2 minutes left, but I also want to talk about, what was that? There's a picture with these balls that have been broken, and
yeah,
I
so
think you could squeeze that in.
Yes. Okay. Kintsugi is this Japanese art form of if something breaks. So if like a ceramic bowl or something breaks, when you reconstruct it, when you're putting it back together, rather than trying to hide or camouflage the breaks, they actually will put it back together using gold epoxy, because in that way they're emphasizing the breaks and making the piece more beautiful and unique in the end. And so, you know, it's, for me, I did it as kind of this therapeutic healing process, but it's so representative of ourselves. Like we can be broken and we will be broken, but it's okay to, you know, when we put ourselves back together, to emphasize the broken parts. We don't need to try to hide them.
Yeah. And you're an amazing example of doing that, taking the things that you've gone through, sharing them, helping heal, and making it a beautiful thing.
Thanks.
You're amazing. For those people that are listening, where can they reach out to you? I know you're a paid speaker. You're worth your time. Trust me. Where can people get a hold of you to to line up a speaking engagement or to do a webinar.
Yeah, I'm all over. So my website is www.cstacyspeak.com, and I'm on all the social media under C Stacy Speak. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
Cool.
you can find me.
Definitely get a hold of this lady. She is a game changer. She can, yesterday it just blew me away. You got them going from laughing to tears to a lot of times people don't like sharing, right? And I don't think there's a single person that didn't share.
They were amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the
Thank you, Jared.
podcast. You are, just absolutely amazing. Be sure to join us next week for episode 14 of We Do Recover. And hopefully our co-host, Dr. Sellers, is getting
recovered.
some R&R. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.
Thank you for joining us today on We Do Recover with Jared Miller.
Help us spread our message of hope. Like, comment, and share.
If you have any topics or ideas for future shows, please share that on our Facebook page.
That Facebook page is We Do Recover with Jared Miller. If you or a loved one needs help, please reach out to us. Again, thank you for listening.
Brought to you by Steps Recovery Center and the St. George Hilton Garden Inn.
This has been a production from a podcast studio.